If you're pitching someone, the goal of it is to get them to be interested and want to ask more questions. Kind of like you meet someone at a cocktail party, the first thing they ask you, you're not going to tell them your life story. You're going to tell them one interesting thing and let the conversation unfold.
Welcome to the DesignRush Podcast. I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Today's special guest is Gregory Galant, co-founder and CEO of Muck Rack, known for innovatively connecting journalists with PR professionals and for creating the Shorty Awards. We'll explore Muck Rack's evolution, technology's role in media relations, and Gregory's PR insights. Remember to like and subscribe for more discussions with industry leaders. Let's get into it. Alrighty, Greg, thank you again so much for joining us on the DesignRush Podcast. It's super great to have you with us again. We're trying again.
Great to be back.
Amazing. Okay, so to kick things off, let's start from the top again. We'd really love to just get to know you a little bit better, especially for our unfamiliar audience. So first off, can you introduce yourself to our viewers a little bit and just about what it is that you do?
Sure. I'm Greg Galant, the co-founder and CEO of Muck Rack. That's M-U-C-K-R-A-C-K, a play on muckraker, the old term for investigative journalists. And we're a platform that corporate communications departments and PR agencies use to find the right journalists to talk to and pitch on a story idea, to monitor the news, to know whenever they're mentioned in the press, globally, online, in print, on TV, and also to build reports on the effectiveness of all their communications and everything they do in relations to public relations to add up, what does all the coverage they get mean?
Okay, amazing. Now, I think I asked you this last time, but I'm going to ask you this again because I just think it's so fascinating. You had a really impressive early start to your career. I know that you started a web development business when you were 14 years old. So just for our audience, could you just explain how exactly did that come about?
Sure. So this was in the late 90s. I was a teenager. I was born in the suburbs, and it was just when the internet became commercially available. I had to dial in to get access to it using, a lot of people used AOL. I used a smaller competitor over there. It's called Prodigy to dial in, and they gave everybody web space. So I figured out how to make my own website. And then I thought, hey, this would be really useful for businesses if they could have websites and their customers and suppliers and everyone else could find them online. So that led to the idea to just start approaching companies and pitch them on the idea of building them a website. And it was a really kind of formative time for me because it actually wasn't that hard to convince them to trust a teenager with building them the website. The hard part was convincing them why they need a website. So now, of course, you'd think it was crazy if you came across some business and you couldn't find them on the web. They didn't have a website or a listing on any other website. But that's how it was back then. And a lot of people just didn't know, why would I need a website? People can find me in the yellow pages. They can call our phone number. They can fax us, or they could just walk into our store. So I had to kind of educate people on what a website meant, what it was about, why they should do it. But it gave me, as a teenager with no experience and a real claim to be able to do this, a big advantage, because no one could say back then, I have 5 years experience building websites or 10 years experience, just because they hadn't been around that long. So it made a level playing field for everybody. And then, we can go on about it. I've repeated that several times in my career as new mediums have come out, and there have been ways to innovate.
Amazing. I think it must have been quite incredible for a 14-year-old to walk into a company and say, hey, let me do your website for you, especially for what I can imagine must have been a bunch of boomers back then as well, not really knowing what even a website is. So I think that's really inspiring, and it's awesome that you jumped on it from such a young age. But moving on now, Greg, just to something that's obviously very close to your heart, which is, of course is Muck Rack. I'd love to delve a little bit more into that. Now, can you just, from the horse's mouth, explain or expand, the goals and the purpose of the Muck Rack company?
Yeah, we want to help organizations communicate better, and we also want to support a free press and give lots of good resources to journalists. And the way that Muck Rack works, and it's kind of different than everyone else in our industry, because we actually started Muck Rack originally with the journalists only in mind. We built a platform where all the journalists could find each other, create portfolios, and show their work. Became very popular with journalists. We had over 10,000 sign up, completely free for the journalists. And then we started being in New York at the time. We just run into PR people and they would all tell us, hey, we're using the site to figure out which journalists to pitch. And then we looked into it and we saw that there was this big pain point that PR people just didn't have good tools to find the right journalist. And it was bad for both sides because the PR people couldn't figure out, hey, who's the right journalists to talk to. And the journalists were getting spam because all the PR people had were the tools of the time. They were all built like, hey, if you have a tech story, email 1,000 tech journalists, but never mind that, probably 80% of them would never cover you because maybe you're launching a hardware fitness device, but your pitch is going to someone who only writes about B2B software or secured, tech security or something like that. So we realized hey, we could use all the data we have, what the journalists are sharing, what they're writing about, and help you figure out the right journals to connect with. So that's how we started, and it's still a really big part of Muck Rack. It helps you find the right journalists to pitch based on everything they've written about in past, everything they've shared on social media. Now we also have a lot of AI tools to help you go even further. So rather than having to blast out to lots of journalists, you could figure out these are the 5 journalists that are going to be most likely to cover me. Let me really double down on reaching them. And then from there, we also found out that our customers had a big pain point on media monitoring, that they have this really big need to figure out the moment they're being mentioned in the press. Maybe it's something good they want to double down on and get behind. Maybe it's a crisis or misinformation. They need to reach out to the people who are writing about them ASAP to get their side of the story out. And finally, we've seen this really big need for reporting, where if you're a big brand, you get thousands or tens of thousands of media mentions, and you need to know, hey, what does it all mean? How's it trending? Are we improving our perception in the public? Is it declining? Do we need to change our messaging? How are we doing relative to competitors? Is the message we really care about, our key message, getting out with our coverage, or are we not controlling the narrative? So the reporting sets up real-time dashboards so that big brands can know, hey, are things going all right? Where do we need to course correct? How do we need to kind of keep reinvesting in communications?
Okay. Now, you mentioned something earlier about, integrating AI and stuff into Muck Rack now. What does that look like at the moment?
Yeah, so we've actually been using AI for probably, at least 5 years, even longer, to do a lot of the processing and kind of machine learning to categorize the millions of articles that we're processing every day. So it's nothing new to us, but we've seen a lot of more advanced uses of AI that we've been able to implement in the last few months, and we'll keep implementing in the years to come. So some recent examples include presspal.ai, a free service that we launched where you can type in kind of the basics of a press release that you need to send out. It'll use generative AI to flush out the whole press release for you. And then, of course, you'd never send that, but then that gives you a nice template that you can use to start editing and kind of finessing to what you need. Same for if you need to write a pitch, and it'll help you. Big thing people don't understand when they pitch journalists, the pitch needs to be really short. And so here we actually use AI to keep your pitch short rather than spew out something super long. So we do a lot of the work for our customers with that tool and training it. And then it also helps you figure out who to send the press release to, because that's the hard part. You can write a press release or a pitch, but if you don't know who to send it to, you're kind of stuck. So it'll automatically make suggestions there. Similarly, it can automatically expand your media list. So if you already have a list of 20 journalists you want to go after, it'll just recommend additional journalists to add to that. kind of like how you have a Spotify playlist that, you've got your 20 favorite songs, and it's like, well, do you want to listen to this song next based on that?
Okay, cool. So, on that note as well, what would you say are the most surprising conclusions of the state of AR and PR in January 2024 that I know Muck Rack recently released?
Yeah, we've seen that, there was initially a lot, some trepidation around AI, but there's just been a tremendous amount of adoption over the last several months, and many more PR people kind of working into the workflows. But yet we've been seeing it really, make them more effective at their jobs, because one of the big challenges in PR that we've heard ever since we started Muck Rack and started giving more tech tools to the PR industry is that people go into PR because they want to be storytellers, they want to be communicators, they want to build relationships, they want to figure out this more strategy work of how you communicate. And then what everyone ends up doing is they spend all their day copying and pasting data into Excel spreadsheets for the figuring out who they want to pitch, copy and paste to get coverage, copy and paste. So a big part of AI is that it's been able to accelerate that even further and kind of liberating them from the mundane elements of it, and really being able to double down on kind of what matters in PR.
Now, we also know that obviously writing copy for social media is one of the most popular uses for AI. Now, what have you heard about the latest popular use that really actually works?
Yeah, let's see. So, of course, aside from writing copy, another big thing we've seen is just insights. We launched a tool called Spike Alerts. So it'll notify you if you're monitoring a broad term. Let's say you're doing, PR, and you're monitoring the Coca-Cola brand, that you can never keep up with every media mention of Coke, and you can't get a, buzz on your phone every time globally something mentions it. But it'll let you know if it's spiking in coverage and give you a lot of tools then to figure out hey, why is it spiking? What's the theme in the recent coverage? So you can really kind of do a level of analysis that'd be impossible for a human to do in such a short amount of time.
Okay, amazing. Now, just going a little bit back, to talking about pitching to journalists and stuff like that. Now, in your experience, Greg, what would you say are the key elements that really make a pitch to journalists stand out and be well received?
Yeah, one thing, like I mentioned before, is brevity. Just really short, clear writing. I think where a lot of people go wrong is that, especially if you get kind of classic PR training, you learn about how to write a press release, and that's, write 500 words and answer the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and why. And that's all fine for, your own press release about it, or if you were the one actually writing the news story like a journalist is. But if you're pitching someone, the goal of it is to get them to be interested and want to ask more questions. Kind of like you meet someone at a cocktail party, the first thing they ask you, you're not going to tell them your life story. You're going to tell them one interesting thing and let the conversation unfold. So I think that's kind of how you have to think about a release, kind of like the opening, or your pitch is kind of the opening gambit to a conversation. So it's really thinking, how do you make it short? How do you make it pithy? Another really important thing is to step back and think hey, what's newsworthy about what I'm releasing? And I think us entrepreneurs are the worst at this, because whenever an entrepreneur, an executive, you build something yourself, you're like, hey, our company did this. Isn't it awesome? Shouldn't everyone want to write about it? It's well, not really. It's great your company did that, but why is it news? If another company did that, would you want to read a news article about that when you open the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal? Probably not. So you have to step back and think, okay, well, what are we doing? For one, I'd say probably the biggest thing is how can you connect it to a trend? So how does what are we doing connect to some bigger trend that the media is looking to write about? So, one super obvious one right now, and this might have already played out too much, But hey, if you're doing a broad tech platform, but it's got an AI element to it, throw that in there, lead with that. I mean, we did that a few months ago when we launched PressPal. That ship's probably already sailed, right? Now everyone says everything's AI. So you have to think, okay, well, what's the next level of it? Does it tie into, ethical AI or security issues people care about? Or how does it relate to, the latest trends and what's going on with, OpenAI and Google? So you have to always be like reading the news and figuring out, and we have a free tool called Muck Rack Trends that can help you figure this out and see what terms are trending up and trending down. But you have to always kind of have your finger on the pulse of the zeitgeist and kind of understand where the public conversation is going. And then you have to deeply understand your company, if you work in-house, or your client, if you work at a PR agency, and know what's coming, what's unique about your company, what features are going to be launched, what new products are going to be launched, and figure out how do you connect those two and how do you make it into, how could it be a really compelling story? And only then you write the brief pitch and then you send it to the right journalist, but you have to kind of start with the story.
Okay, so actually I feel like you've kind of already answered my question that I was going to ask, which is, what's more important to get a journalist's attention? Is it a good email template or a good story? But I feel like you've already said that, having a good story as opposed to just a template that you send out works better. But where would you say the instances are where a good email template really works, if you have to like bang out a whole bunch of emails to a bunch of people? Or is there a way that you can balance both?
Yeah, I think you actually need both, or in other words, like one's a prerequisite to the other, where if you don't have a good story, you could have the best email template in the world. You could even have the best relationships in the world. You could have a journalist, where you go to drinks every week and you've got them, in your cell phone, and like, they're just not going to write a lame story. Like, it's going to make them look bad in front of their editor, in front of their readers. They have metrics too. They have to, they have to write stories that get attention. So the story is essential. And, if you have an amazing story, you could even have a bad email template. Like, imagine you were the head of PR for Apple. There's a new iPhone coming out. Doesn't matter what your email template is. Like, people are going to want to write about that. But the problem is most of us don't have a story that good. Most of us aren't launching a new iPhone, so we have to work for it. And we need to have a good email template because, people aren't going to give us the benefit of the doubt the way that they would Apple. So I think when it comes to an email template, it's about one is to have an awesome subject line. I can't tell you how many times I see companies where like they start a Google Doc and they're all making a million edits on the body of an email, but no one bothered to write, well, what's the subject of the email going to be? And then at the last second before it's sent, someone makes up the subject, pitch idea, story idea or something lame. It's like, hey, you should be spending at least as much time on the subject as you are on the body, and start with the subject, maybe even before you get to the body of the email. So that subject line super important. Keeping the pitch just like, I'd say in our research, we find that journalists really don't want it more than a couple paragraphs even. A lot of journalists even want it shorter. So really going for that brevity and just force yourself not to let it go above a couple hundred words, if that. And then finally, the other piece is like, don't get too focused on the template, because you really need to customize that template for every journalist. And we actually built the Muck Rack pitching system, and we were the first to do this in a way that you set up your template, but if you're sending the email through Muck Rack, it encourages you, almost requires you to customize every version of that template to each journalist you've selected for it to go to before it goes out. That's just essential. And and that's where I think with each one, referencing that you've read their past work, saying why you think it's relevant to them, and anyone, and we've all probably been on the receiving end of it, of people trying to pitch us stuff. Maybe it's a product to buy or something like that. And you always know, if you're getting an email that looks like it's the exact same thing that 1,000 other people got, delete, right? You feel no no, compulsion to even reply to say no. But if you get an email where it's clear, hey, this email was written for you, you feel, there's almost like a moral feeling that, hey, I owe a reply. Or at least, like, hey, some effort went into this. Maybe I'm one of the few people getting it. Maybe it's worth engaging. And, it matters even more for journalists because they're thinking like, hey, if this has gone out to 1,000 of my colleagues and I bother to write about it, there might be 10 other stories about it. And then my story's not unique. If my story's not unique, it's not going to get a lot of attention. And, why get out of bed why get out of bed in the morning just to write the same story that a dozen other people are writing? Versus if you're like, hey, this story's meant for me. They sent it just to me. If I jump on this now, I'll probably be the first or maybe the only one to write this story. That's a lot more compelling. That's where if you're customizing it, it shows them that that opportunity might be there.
Exactly. Do you have any tools or resources that you recommend people, get educated about finding the best angle for pitching titles?
Yeah, we actually have a free academy with Muck Rack. If you just go to academy.muckrack.com or just Google Muck Rack Academy, you'll find it. We have a whole bunch of courses, including one on media relations that we partnered with Michael Smart, who's probably the best known trainer on media relations and pitching. And so you can take that. It's a 2-hour free course. You actually get a certification at the end of it. And he walks you through, everything we just talked about, but in a lot more detail and with a lot more color and shows you real life examples. You can actually see like, hey, here's a good pitch, here's a bad pitch, and dig into what's going to work.
Amazing. I'm definitely going to check that out. So what would you say, Greg, as well, just moving on a little bit now, what mistakes would you say PR professionals should avoid when trying to reach out to journalists? I know we said we need some brevity and all of that there, but is there anything else that you would say really ticks that box of like, don't go there?
Oh man, there's so many mistakes. The worst is when someone doesn't properly code up the media merge and got, hi, first name, would you like to cover this story? And that's why, again, we're huge believers in having that workflow that lets you customize every single version. Yeah, another is just sending a big one is just sending the pitch to the wrong people. And it goes back to where I started, that a lot of people in the industry still operate that way, where they think about quantity rather than quality. And they just figure, like, it'd be a lot more work to figure out like who are the 10 best journalists. So let me just send it to 1,000 journalists. Like, why not? I just need to get a few stories. Who cares if I send it to 999 of the wrong people if I still get to those 10? And I think it's very short-sighted, because what happens is that the journalists who see that totally irrelevant pitch, the journalists know the difference. Like sometimes they get good pitches and they turn them down because they're too busy or whatnot. When they get the totally irrelevant pitch, the pitch where it's like, hey, if you spent 5 seconds, looking at my Muck Rack profile or reading my past work, you'd know I would never cover that in a million years. Then they know you're not being respectful of their time. So, the least worst thing that could happen is that they'll just see your name and your company and be like, I'm not going to open emails from that person anymore. The next worst is they'll hit spam, and then that's going to train spam filters not to accept emails from you or your company anymore. And the worst, and then what's happened a lot now, is that the journalists screenshot the bad pitch and post it to social media. And that, is like the worst thing that can happen to you in this industry. So, it's a dangerous thing to just be sending these unfocused pitches. And I think, both there are consequences, but also it's not the right thing to do, and it's not an effective way to do PR.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously there are so many ways of reaching out to journalists these days. This includes things from the company's press email or the journalist's email or even like their social media pages. But which one would you say gets the better results?
Yeah, I would say, when we survey journalists, the journalists as a whole overwhelmingly prefer email. They prefer that over they like it when people follow them on social, but most journalists don't want to be pitched on social. So what I always advise people to do is, hey, if you're interested in pitching a journalist, follow them on social. If you have lead time, interact with them, interact with their social media posts for a while, read their work, show them you respect what they're doing as well you should, because otherwise, why would you pitch them? But then when it comes to the pitch, unless the journal specifies otherwise, do the pitch by email. That said, though, there are a handful of journalists, and they'll often specify it on their Muck Rack profile or their social profile, where they will say, hey, I'm happy to get the pitch DM to me or whatever. So in those cases, you can do it. But if you do that, still make sure, and a lot of people screw this up surprisingly, like make sure that you're sending it as a private social media message, DM on Twitter, a message on Instagram. Because some people do it as a public, at mention, like, would you write about this, or a comment on someone's Instagram post. And, it's just unprofessional. And then the journalist is also like, well, it's not news anymore because you just told everybody publicly on social media what it is. So it's going to look really lame if I just write about the thing you asked me to write about publicly. So don't make that mistake. And then what I do find sometimes works is you can sometimes do a two-step, and you have to be very thoughtful about how you do this. But I found sometimes when we're pitching stories, we want to be in these too. We'll pitch a journalist by email. But if it's a journalist that I know well and we're at a point in our relationship, again, it has to be a pre-existing relationship. But if we're at the point in the relationship where we're DMing or we're texting, I'll sometimes follow up with a DM or a text and be like, just, hey, we shot you an email last week. Just want to check if you saw it. No worries if you're not interested. Just let us know. So, we know it didn't go to spam. And then I find, so and so the relationships that everyone's usually like, oh yeah, sorry, I missed that. Let me respond now. Or, oh, sorry, I'm just too busy right now, but thanks for following up. So I think that's okay. But that's again, where you got to invest first in the relationship before you can start pinging people through other means like that. Because otherwise it just feels spammy.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so on that note about having like a pre-existing relationship, how would you say PR professionals should go about approaching journalists to actually create a particularly like long-lasting partnership with them? Like, what is the best way, would you say? Once again, like following them on social media and like supporting the stuff that they're doing, sharing their stuff. Like, are there any other types of ways that they could do that?
Yeah. So of course, social media is the obvious one. I think the number one thing is be helpful beyond what you want to get pitched. And so if you're doing PR, you're probably an expert on a few things. If you're in-house, you're definitely going to be an expert on the industry that your company operates in. And even if you're an agency, you've probably become an expert on the industries that all your clients are in. So a lot of times a journalist will post on social like, hey, I'm looking for, a source on this, or maybe about something interesting in the industry that you think would be a good story that doesn't relate to your own company. That's the best time to be reaching out to a journalist. Just be like, hey, I do PR here. This doesn't serve me at all, but there's this big trend. You should know about this thing. Maybe think about writing about it. Or, oh, I saw on social you're looking for, an expert in semiconductors. Our company doesn't do semiconductors, but I happen to, we have this partner, or I happen to know this person who is an expert in semiconductors. Let me connect you. So it's showing that you can be helpful. And then when your name appears in their inbox, they know like, oh, Bianca is very helpful. Like, it's going to be a good thing when I open her email, versus in cases where, it's just the only time they hear from you is when you want something. It's not going to be so useful, just like any other relationship.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, and beyond that, it depends a lot on the person. Like I remember I was once moderating a panel with a couple of journalists, and one of them was like, hey, you know what, if you're talking to me, like you should be taking me out to coffee or drinks. Like I like to know people, I want to know the people that I'm working with. And then the next journalist was like, the worst thing in the world would be to have to go meet any of you for coffee or drinks. Like I'm an introvert. I want to be in my apartment writing. Like that's why I became a journalist. I like to write. So, to me, that is an instructive lesson where, everyone wants you to be helpful. Everyone wants you to read their stuff. Everyone wants you to follow them on social. And then beyond that, when it comes to relationship building, it's, human beings are very different. So you have to really learn the person and then figure out what's the right way to engage with them.
Well, also on that note, we do know that a lot of journalists obviously like ask for a fee when, or in return for pitching a story. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so, most people at reputable outlets won't take money to write about a story. And in fact, if someone at any major media outlet, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time, like if it came out that, I'm sure none of them would ask for a fee, but if they did, they would definitely get fired. Like that's kind of a third rail. But then I do know that, it's kind of a wide media world out there, and there are a lot of smaller publications and, new things being started all the time that don't follow the traditional rules. So I can never say exactly what someone else should do in that regard, but I think you have to be really careful about getting into doing something like that. I think a lot of the people who would ask for the fee, probably don't have that meaningful of audience anyhow, so it can be a red flag. And then also you have to worry about regulatory issues, because if the fee, it'd be one thing if the fee's disclosed and it's like, hey, and you do see that on a lot of places, like, even on Amazon, you'll see sponsored reviews. And there is actually a place, where they can have these kind of special sections that are paid, like you read a magazine, and this does happen in reputable magazines, that they'll say at the top, if it's disclosed, this is a paid feature, and we partnered with this brand to write this thing, and it kind of looks like an article, but it's disclosed it's really with this brand. So long as it's disclosed, I think it's kosher. But the thing that I would really avoid is when someone asks for the fee and you're not planning on disclosing it, because that, I think, one, it's unethical, because they're now misleading their audience because they got paid off and they're writing about this thing, and it can create legal liability. And the FTC has gone after people for not disclosing those paid relationships. So I think, when you go into it, if you're really going for earned media, it's only earned if you're not paying for it. So I think the best way to do it is not to pay a fee. But if you are going to pay a fee, just make sure that it gets disclosed and it's all being done above board. And then, just double check that that you're going to get the value for this.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people really just want transparency with any sort of media that they're consuming, right? So yeah, I think that's very good advice. Now, just moving on a little bit, now looking from like a journalist's perspective, what do you think that they can do to really like maximize their presence in a media monitoring tool like Muck Rack?
Yeah, I think from the journalist perspective, one is journals can claim their profile. We're the only platform that allows that. And by claiming your profile, you can decide like what are the right stories to feature on there. Also, let us know. Our system does a great job pulling in all the stories from a journalist, but let's say you wrote something for some small trade publication that doesn't even have a website, you can upload a PDF of that work, so you can really make sure that the profile is complete and rounded out. We also have an editorial team, so for some journalists who are too busy to claim the profile and log in themselves, you can just email our editorial team, and they'll do it all for you. You could say, hey, you missed this story here. I'd like this story featured, or I just got a promotion, so update my job title. So it gives journalists a lot of flexibility there. And what we find happens with a lot of journalists is like they make a website once, either they go to Squarespace, or they have that friend who's a programmer and they ask them to make a website. They make some beautiful website, but they're busy, right? It's a lot of work to be a journalist. And then you look at the website 3 years later and you go to the portfolio and they haven't had time to update the portfolio in 3 years. So you see a lot of people end up defaulting to their Muck Rack portfolio instead of their own website, or they just make the portfolio section of their own website a link to Muck Rack and have their website just be their bio, and other things don't change a lot. So I think it's a really big opportunity for journalists to kind of take control of how they're presented on the web.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it, is just to link it right back to your your Muck Rack portfolio as well. So just transitioning a little bit again now, Greg. Now, I don't know if you know this, but we at DesignRush specialize in connecting businesses with top professional agencies. So from your perspective at Muck Rack, how important has it been for your business or businesses in general, especially like in the PR and media sector, to partner with the right agencies like web design, digital marketing, and just say, for instance, like overall brand strategy? I mean, how do you see platforms like DesignRush really playing a role in this ecosystem?
Yeah, I found it's been essential to find the right people to work with, both employees and agencies. And we've used a bunch over the years, both building our in-house marketing and PR team. But then we found working with agencies super valuable too, because a lot of times, when you're spending all your time just working in one company, you're not getting to see the best ideas that are emerging out of a bunch of other places. So we've always kind of brought agencies in here and there to help us and figure out like, okay, what marketing best practices or SEO best practices or design best practices are we missing? Where can you add extra value, and how can we really supercharge things?
Okay. Now, again, shifting gears a little bit now to a topic that's, of course, especially since COVID reshaped our professional lives, and I'm talking about remote work, as if anybody is surprised. Now, in 2021, I know that you helped the Work Remotely Forever pledge. This was a commitment by business leaders intended, not to force employees to work from offices. Now, I'd love to know, Greg, what exactly inspired you to initiate this movement?
So we've been remote first pretty much since we started. So when we started, we did have an office, but about half of our team was always just remote, living in whatever city they happened to live in. So they, of course, working remotely. And then we were like, well, it'd be kind of silly to force the people who happen to live near our office to come in, when if they didn't live near the office, we'd be fine with them working from home. So we never forced anyone into the office pre-COVID. And on the average day, the office would be half empty. In fact, people would come visit the office and they'd be like, are you guys doing okay? Because like there's no one around here. And we're like, no, the business is great. We're growing double digits, but we're just not making people come in. And everyone would be like, well, how do you know if anyone's actually working? And I'd always throw it back and I'd be like, how do you know if anyone's working in your office? And we've always been big believers that you have to hire really motivated people and set up good KPIs to measure performance against. So that's how we always operated. Then during the pandemic, of course, we had to shut our office, as did everyone else. Made it a much easier transition for us because we didn't have a server, we didn't have a whiteboard, we didn't have any papers. We were already had Zoom and Dropbox and Slack and all the best remote working tools. And then we grew a lot, and then a lot of the new people we hired were spread out all around, and when we surveyed, nobody wanted to come back to the office. So we totally ditched the office when the lease was up in 2021. But then we were thinking about it, and I noticed that like a lot of companies, at first I thought like, hey, well, we've lost our competitive advantage. It used to be that we were unique in that we didn't make people come to an office. And then for a while there during the pandemic, everybody didn't make anyone come to the office. So we're like, oh, we're what makes us unique? And then we realized like, oh, wait, all these companies, like a lot of them are thinking about making people come back. And I saw in a lot of my friends who worked at those kinds of companies that they weren't giving clear guidance though, if they were ever going to make people come back or not. And it created all this angst because a lot of people had moved in some cases just out to the suburbs or somewhere a lot further from headquarters. So whereas before the pandemic, they would have had a 10-minute commute. Now they'd have an hour commute if they had to come back, or they moved to a totally different city, or they're in limbo. They don't know if they can move or not because they don't know if this company is going to force them back. So the kind of statement we wanted to make was like, hey, at the very least, just tell people if you're going to make them come back or not so they can start planning their lives. And then we were also, and very much are believers that for a knowledge working company, where you don't have a factory where it's people working with their minds in a computer, they can be just as effective remotely as they would be in an office. I mean, there are pros and cons, but there's so many pros to being remote. We're believers that, on par, it's better to be remote. So this was a way for us to tell not only our employees, but encourage other companies to join us in saying like, hey, if you take a job here, it's not going to be a year later, hey, it'd be great if you came to the office. No, we're going to support remote work forever. And we felt it was a great template to show. So if you're someone who's looking for a job and you want to be able to work remotely, that you can see in one place what companies are committed to remote work.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think it's very interesting because you're saying that, or as you said, there's a lot of companies that, were kind of wishy-washy about like, are we going back to the office? Are we not going back to the office? And I think that was a really cool initiative that you guys instated as well. So just regarding that as well, what do you see in the future of this pledge? Like what is the end game? Or where do you hope to see it go in the next coming years?
Yeah, we want to keep getting more companies to join us on this. I think more and more companies are realizing that remote work works and that it's, or we even call it distributed because there's nothing to be remote from if you don't have an office. But we went with remote work because that's what most people call it. But we want to encourage more companies to do this because, and I do have to back up, it's not necessarily for everybody. Like I was saying, if you have some company designing hardware, maybe you want to be in the office to play with the iterations of the hardware. But I think a lot more companies than are doing it could really benefit from it. And then I find also so many companies just doing ridiculous things. Like I talk to so many people where they have to come to the office. Everyone shows up in an office, closes the door to their office and gets on Zoom. Or they come to the office and then everyone's working with other people in other offices. So I've seen that a lot, especially at these really big companies where it's like, yeah, you got to go to your office and commute an hour, but then the project you're working on is with people at other offices of your company in different cities or countries even. So, I think there's been kind of a lot of people just wanting to go back to how it was. We have to remember, it's not like, it's not like the modern office is something that was, natural, like a rainforest, and something that, when humans evolved, it was always there. Like this is something that was invented, in less than the last 100 years, and it's not necessarily here to stay. And I think, there'll always be places people congregate to work, but what we know is the office pre-pandemic might have just, we might look back on that and be like, oh yeah, that made sense for like 50 years of human history. And then when all these digital tools came out, we realized like it doesn't make sense to, have everyone sitting in some cubicle with a big monitor in front of them, that you could have either no office at all for some companies like we're doing, but maybe for other companies, you have kind of a hangout space and you just have places people can pull up to with their laptops, or it's all organized around the meeting spaces, and then you go home to do your solitary work. So I think there's a lot that can be rethought, and we want to kind of push people to think more creatively versus just kind of like this very regimented return to office feeling, and let's get things back to the way they were.
Absolutely. I am 100% on board with you, not just because I've been a remote worker even before COVID, but I do believe that, I know that there are some people that do benefit from being in an office environment. I do know there are some people that don't want to work from home. But like you just mentioned, I think there is a benefit to having like a space where people can meet, and like you said, around the meeting spaces, and you can interact, on the days that you feel like you need to get out of the house. I really do think that's definitely the way to go. So what kind of benefits have you, verified since implementing and maintaining a remote workforce? What would you say are like the 3 top ones?
Number one, you can get the best talent anywhere. And once you've gotten used to this, our leadership team spread out between New York, Miami, the Bay Area in California, Massachusetts, Colorado, Chicago. So, plus we have great team members, not just the US, but Canada, Italy, Argentina, Warsaw. So, really all over. And then once you've been doing this, it starts to feel insane to limit a search to one city. Like now I feel like, wait, it's hard enough to find great talent when you're searching globally, especially as you're growing and you need like much more specialized positions. It seems like it'd be crazy, even if you pick the best talent markets. If you were to pick New York or the Bay Area or Austin, if you told me like, wait, you can only hire in one of them, it's just like, oh wait, but why would I shut myself off to 90% of the talent pool? So I think that's number one. And then I find, people end up traveling for work all the time anyhow, or working from home. So it's like it barely matters where people are for a lot of these roles anyhow. So yeah, I'd say number one is getting that great talent. Number two is giving them a lot of flexibility, because we find a lot of really great workers like need this particular kind of setup. And I remember when we used to have the office, it was always awkward because you'd have programmers like deep into a programming problem, and then someone wants to ask them a question. They go back to their programming problem. They're like, it was like, I'd spent the last hour kind of working this issue out. Now I forgot because I had this 5-minute conversation on something else. And it's going to take me like another 20 minutes to get back into this. So I used to see the programmers that all wear big headphones to signal like, don't talk to me. And then it's like, well, what's the point of coming to the office just to be like, don't talk to me with these headphones? Same with the salespeople. It used to be gospel pre-pandemic that salespeople had to be in the office. Like, okay, the programmers, maybe they can work from home, but the salespeople, they got to be in there for their collective energy. We never made the salespeople come in. I always saw our best salespeople were the ones who liked working from home the most, because really great salespeople, they're always thinking like, how can I optimize my day? And I saw even people who lived, maybe a half-hour subway ride from the office back when we had one. And a lot of them would only come in maybe once a week, once a month. And I'd sometimes just ask them like, hey, I'm just curious. I thought salespeople are social. Like, don't you want to be coming to the office every day? And they'd be like, hey, look, half-hour subway ride plus like another 5 minutes to leave my apartment building, and 5 minutes to get into the office, and 5 minutes to get situated and say hi to people. So, maybe that's 40 minutes total, so you add that up, that's an hour and 20 minutes a day round trip. Like I can spend an extra hour and 20 minutes talking to customers, being on demos, selling the software. Like, that's a really good point. And then they used to always complain, that they're talking over each other in an open office, or that there's not enough conference rooms. And I saw a lot of people just set up a nice home office. A lot of our top salespeople, like they're in their bedroom, but they set it up. They got a comfy chair, nice desk, and they're killing it and working hard. Also, then I see, both for parents, like a lot of them, they want to be able to send their kid off to school, help pick their kid up from school and then get back to it after that. So it allows for that flexibility. Finally, too, I saw over the pandemic, a lot of people got dogs, and now they do not want to leave the dog. So I've seen a lot of people where they're like, hey, I got this COVID puppy. It expects me to be there all the time. So the idea of leaving that puppy alone for 9 hours while, 8 hours for work, an extra hour for commute, if you're lucky, seems awful. And then you can't go out after work because then you're gone longer. And I've seen all these people got these cameras at home, so now they could see the puppy like waiting for them by the door. Guilt trips them even more. So whole bunch of reasons I think why remote work is just so powerful.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I am definitely one that has been caught up with the with not wanting to leave my dogs for sure. Yeah, I get that 100%, and I can see it from wanting to send your kids off to school, making their lunch. It does just provide so much more flexibility, and I'd say a great work-life balance. But just on the flip side, what challenges would you say have emerged from a remote work culture, and how has Muck Rack addressed those?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question, and it'd be naive to say, hey, there are no challenges. Any working environment creates its own set of challenges. I think One is, and this is something I think is an understated challenge for in-office companies, but makes itself even clearer with remote companies, is that you need to set up really clear metrics for success and measure work. And that measurement shouldn't be how many hours is somebody working. It should be all about, their effectiveness and what their, the output that they're driving. And a lot of people in office environments, they don't set up thoughtful metrics. So unfortunately, the metric is just, well, who's at the office the longest? But you don't know. Someone might be at the office checking their Facebook feed or not really doing any work. And then you might have someone else who's super effective, but they want to leave at 5 o'clock every day because they have to pick their kid up. But it sends a bad vibe, and people are like, well, why isn't this person staying later like the rest of us? So I think the being remote, it forces you to grapple with like, okay, well, what are the metrics that matter? We're huge believers in the OKR system, objectives and key results, which was a system that was pioneered by Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel. And the idea is that every quarter you set up like, what are the objectives and key results for the company? And they're all those key results are measurable, like, hey, improve this metric by 20% or whatever it is. And then that breaks down so that everybody at the company has goals that relate to that. It's also transparent. So everyone at the company can see those objectives and key results and know like what are the company priorities. So you don't have to wonder like, well, am I working on something that matters to the company? We're just being 100% reliant on your boss to communicate that effectively to you. So, that's been one of the huge things. Another is that you still have to create culture and communications among your team and create a sense of camaraderie. So I find a lot of people, they tried out remote work during the pandemic, but because they figured they'd go back to an office soon enough, they never invested in it. But the second you say, hey, we're not going back to an office, then you can actually take all those resources that used to spend on the office snacks and getting the temperature right to appease everybody and your IT systems for your conference rooms and all those other headaches, and put it into like, well, how do we make a great remote culture? So we do a lot. We're very thoughtful about how we set up Slack, about team Zooms. We'll highly produce. We even have one of our programmers, a DJ. So we even have a DJ at the beginning of the Zoom to really hype everybody up and set the vibe for the meeting. Then and then the other point I want to make is that just being distributed or remote, it doesn't mean you can never meet in person. So we're actually big believers in the value of meeting in person, building relationships in person. We just did our first ever all company offsite where we flew everyone in the company to Cancun. It's over 200 people, and everyone got to spend several days working together, meeting together, and just having some fun together too. Because we find if you know someone, it makes the relationship so much stronger than if you never met them in person. In addition to that, we do hub events. So if you happen to live in a city where a bunch of other people at our company live, like Chicago or New York or Austin, there'll be a regular hub event that you can just meet up for drinks or an activity and catch up with a bunch of people in your team that way. And then various teams will also do their own retreats to get people together. So I think it gives the best of both worlds. And I know, from our team, like everyone was a lot more excited about going to Cancun rather than having to go to an office. And it's in fact, less expensive to fly everyone to exotic places and meet than it is to maintain an office, at least in most cases. So I think you can deploy your dollars a lot more thoughtfully to let your company meet up and connect with each other than with an office.
Exactly. So, okay, what advice in all of those cases would you say or would you share with companies that are considering to transition into a fully remote workplace model? I mean, specifically in terms of, maintaining that team coordination and collaboration.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of it is being thoughtful about your tools. I think having a good way, there's a lot of different systems you can use. We use OKRs, like I said, but there are a lot of similar ideas like Salesforce has something called V2MOM. It stands for values to something, something. I don't know, I remember exactly. There's something called the Entrepreneur Operating System or lots of others. And I think it really matters what you choose, just as long as you have a system. And you can make up your own too. But I find, way too many companies are not thoughtful about it, and they don't think in terms of a system. They're just like, hey, I wish my organization would do this. I don't understand why they're not doing it. And it's like, well, you didn't set up a system, so no one, so when you have one person, or even if you have a 5-person company, you can get by without having a system and just tell people this is what we're going to do. But once you get beyond that, it's like, if you don't have a way to communicate where you want to go in a very clear way that everyone understands and everybody gets trained in, then you can't get a large group of people to go in the same direction. So that's where I think it's essential to be thoughtful about setting up these systems, having some kind of software. It could be a Google Doc, it could be a specialized software that tracks all this for you, like a performance management system. But if you have specialized tools for it and let everyone know where to go look at it, you're going to be able to move your company a lot more deliberately. And in a way, a lot of people spend a lot of time coming up with the strategy, but if you have a strategy and you can't execute it, then the strategy is irrelevant. Whereas if you can execute because you can communicate, you can even have a crappy strategy, and it'll kind of be fine because you'll execute it, and then you'll find out the strategy sucks, and then you can adjust your strategy pretty quickly, and then eventually you'll get to the right strategy. Whereas you get the perfect strategy, and if you can never execute it, then you're always just spinning your wheels.
Exactly. I mean, I've always thought that having a strategy is better than having no strategy at all. And like you said, you learn from your mistakes when you're going into that. So just finally, on the topic of remote work, we know that a lot of these tech billionaires, like for instance, Elon Musk, have a very different opinion on remote work, claiming that people are more productive when they're in person. What is your counter argument to that?
Yeah, so I would say, there's the argument people are more productive when they're in person. And again, I have to caveat it all with it depends what you're doing. If you're designing a rocket or a car where you're going to need to be near the hardware, then no dispute, I'm sure that's true. But when it comes to, let's say designing software where it doesn't matter, if you're together or not, I think there's a lot of advantages to being remote. One is focus time, because there are a lot of people who need to do uninterrupted work, like I was saying with programming or doing demos for customers, where you can actually be more productive at home or in an environment where you're not going to get interrupted at all, especially if the alternative's an open office where you're just kind of getting interrupted constantly. And then another is that level of being able to get the great talent where, maybe it would be true that, hey, if you had these 100 people in person collaborating, they'd be more effective than if they weren't in person. But you might never be able to get those right 100 people in the same room on a regular basis because they live in different cities, they live far away from the office, so a lot of their time would be killed commuting. So I think, there's just that element where you can get the right talent, and then you can get to a very similar place in terms of collaboration with all the new technology that's come out, as well as being able to get people together in person. And I think there's a bit too where you want to always in business be skating to where the puck's going. The one thing we know is that all this remote collaboration software, it's only going to get better. I mean, just think how much better. I mean, really, Zoom is now, even compared to when the pandemic started. They've added a ton of functionality. Everyone's gotten better cameras, better noise canceling mics. And I can only imagine, where this is all going to go in, even in 1 year, but much less in 5 or 10 years, how good this the remote tool set will be. And I think, if you're setting yourself up to learn from that, you're kind of going with the tide in knowledge work, versus if you're, just kind of ignoring all the remote collaboration software and all focused on getting people to one physical space, you're you're going to have to keep fighting and going upstream.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Those are all very, very good points. Now, Greg, as we wrap up our very insightful conversation, thank you so much again for having us or being with us today. I just have one more question for you, and that is, if you could give any piece of advice to 14-year-old Greg, what would you say?
I think a lot of it's just about perseverance. With business, I find it's always a marathon, never a sprint. So it's always just keep going and keep building and iterate and figure out what works.
Amazing. Greg, thank you so much again for joining us today. Really, I appreciate you taking the time, and even with all of the rescheduling that we had to do from last week. Really, thank you so much. We've had a great time with you today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
A big thank you again to Greg for his incredibly valuable insights. If you're looking for a top digital agency for your next project, look no further than designrush.com/marketplace. Here you'll find a range of agencies tailored to make your project a success. Remember to like and subscribe for more inspiring talks with industry leaders. Again, I'm your host, Bianca Mayer. Stay curious and join us for the next episode.